Good morning. It's Mrs. LaPetra. Today we're going to do our review for our test. So the title of your notes should be Essential Algebra Review for Test. You can think of this page's notes as your note card. Your note card for your test, because your test is Friday. So what we're going to do first is, here we go. Let's talk about what it means to be in factored form. Factored form. So when it's in factored form, you should see some parentheses. So let me give you some examples of items that are in factored form. Like x plus 3 times x minus 5. That's factored form. Y times y minus 8. That's in factored form. X minus 2 times x minus 3 times an x. That's in factored form. These are not in factored form. And you should be writing these down as I'm going over it. Not in factored form would be something like x squared plus 8x plus 15. Y squared minus 8y. X to the third minus 2x squared plus 7. Those are not in factored form. So try to be able to tell the difference between something in factored versus something not in factored form. Next, we talked about solving. And that's the reason why we want something in factored form, because when we solve, your steps are set your equation to 0. And if it's not set to 0, get it to equal 0. Put it in factored form. Because it's in factored form and set to 0, and then because of the zero product property, you're going to set each factor to 0. Oops, to 0. And 4 is solve those little equations. So we started off the chapter kind of working on this, these like steps. First, you were given an equation like this. X plus 8, can you see what I'm doing? X plus 8 times x minus 5 equals 0. So follow those steps. Is it set equal to 0? Yes. Is it in factored form? Yes, because I got those parentheses. Look up at top. Factored form versus not. So this one is in factored form. So check, check. So because it's in factored form, I'm going to take each factor and set it equal to 0. So x plus 8 could equal 0, and x minus 5 could equal 0. Getting two solutions, -8 and a +5. We also then went into GCF. So something like 4x squared plus 20x equals 0. So if I needed to solve that equation, it is an equation, it is set equal to 0, but is it in factored form? Is this factored? No. So to get it to factored form, you have two methods. One method is if it has a GCF. The other method that we learned was to find your factor pair. So when you have this kind of trinomial, factor a trinomial, you find the factor pair of C that adds to a B. Now these two terms here in this problem, number 2, have a GCF. They have a common factor of 4, because 4 goes into 4 and 4 goes into 20. And they both have an x in common. He has 2 x's, this guy has 1. So 4x is the GCF. That's going to be like unfactored or undistributed from the term. So 4x distributed 2 and x is what gave us 4x squared, and 4x times plus 5 is what gives us 20x. So see how we pulled out or divided out a 4x from both of those terms. Now it's in factored form, so I can take each factor and set each factor to 0 and solve. So I get x equals 0 and x equals -5. So, let's turn to the next page, the top of the back there. Oh, my. This one. Okay, so on the top of the next page, let's talk about factoring. Or actually, first let's talk about, you might see a parabola on your test Friday. So a parabola looks like that. So you have an x-axis and a y-axis. And let's say you had to go find your x-intercepts. And then they gave you the equation, y equals x plus 3 times x minus 5. Well, your x-intercepts are this point here and this point here. So there's two of them. Your x-intercepts are when your y value is equal to 0. We've talked about this many times in many of the videos, in many notes. So now I have a polynomial equation set equal to 0. It's in factored form. How can you tell something's in factored form? Then you set each factor to 0. So x plus 3 could equal 0. X minus 5 could equal 0. Solve those little equations. You get x equals -3 and x equals +5. So what that means is this point here, because it's a graph, so it has a coordinate, an x and a y coordinate. Here's your x value, mostly because it says x equals -3, comma, the y value, well, we did the x-intercepts, that was when y is 0, your y is a 0. And then the other point, two separate points, 5, 0, x and a y. So those would be your answers. Okay, so you'll probably see something like that on your test. You are also going to see, factoring the trinomials. So trinomials that look like this. And so when you're trying to find the factor pairs, factor pair of that constant one, factor pairs that add to the b. This one. Those are the two numbers that are important for this section. Okay, so first let's practice one of those. Something like x squared plus 8x minus 20, and the direction would say factor, or what are its factors. So we want to look at -20 and find all of its factor pairs. 1 times 20 gives me 20. 2 times 10 gives me 20. 3 does not go into 20. 4 times 5 goes into 20. Now, because we're trying to get a -20, that means one of these pairs has to be negative, one of the numbers in the pairs. So it could be this side, but it could also be the other side. So I'm going to rewrite my pairs again. But this time I'm going to put the negative on the opposite number pairing. So you have to pay attention to which one of these factor pairs adds up to that middle term of 8. And for this one, let's look at the sums. I don't think we've done this. So we're going to find the sum. Negative 1 plus 20, that's a 19. Negative 2 plus 10, that's 8. Negative 4 plus 5 is 1. 1 plus negative 20 is negative 19. 2 plus negative 10 is negative 8. 4 plus negative 5 is negative 1. See how there's 6 options here for what multiplies to negative 20, but only one of them adds up to an 8. And they all have different sums. So only one pair is going to be your answer. Your answer is this one, because we were looking for the b value is 8. So my factors are x minus 2 times x plus 10. We didn't have a lot of room here. Let's squeeze one more direction. Let's do solve. X squared minus 10x equals 9. So the whole chapter is called polynomial equations. To solve a polynomial equation, step 1 is set it equal to 0. And again, this is your note card, so you might want to write down a lot of information in your notes that I'm doing right here, because you can use this paper for the test. Now, I've already looked at the test and made the test, so the review is very similar to the test. I could be giving you some answers right now for the test on Friday. It's up to you to do good notes. So you want to set this equation equal to 0. So to do that, I got to subtract 9 to both sides. Actually, I want this to be a negative 9. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry, that was the original equation. X squared minus 10x equals negative 9. So the first step is set equal to 0. So in this equation, I am going to add 9 to both sides. So I get x squared minus 10x plus 9 equals 0. There we go. So now it's set to 0, but it's not in factored form. So I need to get it to those factors. So we need to look at the factors of 9 and find which one adds to a negative 10. 1 times 9 or 3 times 3. Now how am I going to get a multiplying to a positive but adding to a negative? 2 positives don't add up to a negative 10, but 2 negatives add up to a negative 10. So there's my answer, negative 1 and negative 9. So x minus 1 times x minus 9 equals 0. And then we set each factor to 0. And we get 2 solutions, 1 and 9. So that was your review. Good luck on your test on Friday. Make sure you've copied all these notes. Go back and rewind if you have to. Ask some questions. Talk to you soon.